We believe stories should be told by humans, with real emotion, not by some soulless AI. If you agree and want to support real human storytelling, hit that subscribe button so we can keep it that way. My name is Daniel Pierce, and I'm honored to be your narrator. Now, let's begin. The wind on planet Karun was more than just wind. It was a thief that stole the heat from your bones and snatched the words from your lips. For Nir, that biting cold was nothing new. She'd carried a deeper, more permanent chill inside her for 10 long years, a frost born from a single, fiery memory. Her wings, once the deep, vibrant blue of a twilight sky on her home world, were now tucked tightly under a thick cloak. They were made for soaring on warm air currents, not for this. Today, they were just a mangled, bruised purple, a mess of puckered scars that served as a constant, aching reminder of the orbital bombardment that had turned her planet, her sky, and her entire life into nothing but glass and ash. She stood at the edge of the ramshackle settlement, her hand resting on the hilt of a knife hidden in her tunic. The blade was forged from the shrapnel of her dead world, its cold steel a familiar anchor in the silence, and across the dusty expanse she saw him. On his knees in the dirt was Coulson Park, the butcher of Aisha, the architect of her personal hell. But he wasn't acting like a monster. He was trying to coax a nervous, long-bodied creature toward a pen, its huge, dark eyes wide with fear. Next to him stood a small crayon child, his little face wet with tears. "Shh, it's okay," Park said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was terrifyingly different from the tyrant's roar in her nightmares. "He's just not used to all this open space, little one. It's scaring him." He kept the animal's lead loose, kneeling to make himself seem smaller, and kept murmuring to it in that same gentle tone. He held out a hand to the child. "Here, you show him. You're his friend. He'll trust you." The little crayon wiped his eyes with a stubby three-fingered hand, and after a second, took Park's hand. Together, they reached out to the creature. It snorted, its feathery antennae twitching, but then it nudged their joined hands with its soft, leathery nose. Park smiled, a genuine crinkling around his eyes, and the sight of it felt like a knife twisting in Nir's gut. This was the monster she had hunted across 3 star systems? This dusty man? In that moment, the fortress of hate she had carefully built around her heart for a decade didn't just tremble, it cracked. A single, hairline fracture, but it was a start. A tremor ran through her, and she gripped the cold steel of her blade, trying to fight back the poison of doubt. Revenge was supposed to be simple. This was complicated, and she didn't want any part of it. Later, in the communal dining hall, the feeling only got worse. The large dome was lit by a gentle green glow from clusters of moss hanging from the ceiling. The air smelled like fresh bread and damp earth. And all around her were former soldiers, people from a dozen species who had once tried to annihilate each other, now sitting peacefully together. They were all unarmed. Veterans sat at long tables, sharing food in a comfortable silence. War orphans from across the galaxy, a whole menagerie of kids, chased each other between the tables, their laughter echoing in the quiet hall. Nir sat by herself at the far end of a bench, her vegetable stew untouched. The quiet was unnerving. She was used to the noise of refugee camps, the hum of failing equipment, the arguments, the crying. This quiet felt different, heavier. It felt like a place where all the shouting was finally over. Her eyes locked onto Coulson Park. He was in the middle of the room, sitting with a massive crayon who had a crude prosthetic arm and a human woman with watchful eyes. He ate slowly, deliberately. Nir imagined the path her blade would take, one quick step, a lunge across the table. Her hand rested on the hidden knife, the worn leather a familiar friend against her leg. It would be so easy. She could do it in 3 seconds, but her feet felt like they were nailed to the floor. Every time she looked at him, the image of the gentle man in the dust with the scared child would flash in her mind, covering the monster from her nightmares. The 2 pictures just wouldn't merge, and the conflict made her feel weak and dizzy. The human woman, who had introduced herself as Soon, seemed to feel Ner's stare. She looked across the room and gave Ner a small, hesitant smile. Ner immediately dropped her eyes to her stew, her jaw clenched tight. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to be an executioner. She forced herself to take a bite. The bland stew tasted like ash. The cold ache in her wings deepened, a familiar pain that for the first time in a very long time felt like a welcome friend. The hydroponic gardens were housed in a long, low building, its translucent roof softening the harsh light of Karun's twin suns. The air inside was warm and humid, smelling of rich soil and growing plants. It was a place bursting with life, the exact opposite of the dead world Ner carried inside her. She was assigned to work there, calibrating nutrient drips. Coulson Park was at the far end of the bay, his back to her. He was tending to a row of delicate flowers, and he moved with a profound stillness. It was the focus of a craftsman or a monk. Then a chilling thought hit her. It was also the focus of a sniper, the patience of a man who knows how to wait for the perfect moment to kill. And then, the universe handed her an opportunity on a silver platter. She was on a narrow catwalk checking the overhead misters. Directly below her, Park knelt down to inspect a plant's roots, and right next to her on the catwalk sat a heavy, solid-state power cell. It was a dense rectangle, easily 30 kilos. It would be a tragic accident. In a remote place like this, accidents happened all the time. Her heart started pounding against her ribs. This was it. Her hands felt clumsy, her breath coming in short gasps. She nudged the power cell with her boot until it was teetering right on the edge. She looked down at his graying hair. He was completely focused on the plant, a perfect, vulnerable target. One more tiny push was all it would take. But then he looked up. He looked right past her, toward the translucent ceiling, his expression calm. But his eyes held an ancient stillness, and in that instant she knew. He knew who she was. He knew why she was here. He knew exactly what she was about to do. And he didn't move. He just stayed there, silent. Then he lowered his gaze back to the soil and closed his eyes, his shoulders relaxing. He was offering her his life. He was accepting the blow. That acceptance completely shattered her. It was like looking in a mirror and seeing her righteous vengeance for what it really was, ugly and crude. The clean, simple lines of her rage blurred into something messy and wrong. She froze, her foot hovering over the power cell. In a flash, the hulking crayon, Store, appeared from behind a rack of trays. With a deep grunt, he slammed his powerful shoulder into the metal support holding up the catwalk. The whole structure groaned and shifted a few centimeters. The jolt was all it took. The power cell, already on the edge, tipped and fell. But because of the shove, its path had changed. It missed Park by a meter, crashing into a row of clay pots with a deafening smash that echoed through the entire greenhouse. Park opened his eyes. He didn't even glance at the shattered power cell. His gaze went past Store and fixed directly on Ner. And his eyes held a sorrow so vast it felt like it had no bottom. Store straightened up and shot a glare at Ner. "Clumsy," he growled, the word rumbling in his chest. A flush of shame, so hot it almost felt like it could warm her scarred wings, washed over Ner. She scrambled down from the catwalk on shaky legs, unable to look at Park or Store. He hadn't fought back like the monster she expected. He had acted like a penitent, and in doing so, he had taken her righteous anger and shown her what it truly was, the desperate, heartbroken grief of a broken child. The blade beneath her tunic suddenly felt impossibly heavy, its weight no longer that of a weapon, but of a tombstone. She found Store in his workshop, a huge, echoing space that smelled like ozone and burnt metal. Sparks flew from a grinder as he shaped a crude prosthetic, a replacement for his main left arm. His people, the Crayon, were a race of builders and warriors. Their massive arms could handle the heaviest work, yet tiny retractable manipulators at their wrists could perform the most delicate tasks. Losing a primary arm was like losing half of who you are. Store killed the grinder, and the sudden silence hammered at Neri's ears. He turned, his heavy eyelids sweeping sideways across his eyes as he focused on her. His face was a rough map of old scars and coarse fur. "What is it?" he rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly sound. "I need to ask about the wall," she said. "About the firebreak company." Storr made a noise that was half scoff, half sigh. He grabbed a rag and started wiping grease from the prosthetic's bare metal joints. "That's ancient history. Better to let it stay buried." "The law about humans," Neri pushed, her words echoing the polished, sanitized version from the official histories. "They say it was for the safety of the galaxy." Was it? For the first time, real emotion flashed across Storr's face. His lips peeled back from his tusks in a sneer. He let out a short barking laugh that held no humor. "Our safety," he spat on the concrete floor. "Try the Assembly's safety." They were terrified of what they'd approved, of what they'd let loose. He went quiet, his eyes locked on the metal arm. Neri waited. The only sounds were the drip-drip of a leaky pipe and the constant moan of the Carunian wind against the workshop walls. "My unit was dug in on Tarvos," he finally said, his voice dropping low. "We were fortified, a mountain garrison with overlapping kill zones. We had orbital support. We were Crayon regulars, the unbreakable line." He looked up. "Then they told us the humans were coming. Firebreak Company. We laughed. One company against an entire legion. We pictured some roided-out charge, a glorious frontal assault we'd shatter into a million pieces." He paused, setting the rag down and smoothing it perfectly flat on the workbench. "They came from a direction we never expected. For 3 days, our scanners showed nothing but dust storms and silence. We started to get comfortable, figured their transport must have crashed. Then little things started to go wrong." His good hand clenched into a tight fist. "Our water recyclers went down, contaminated. Then a fuel depot on the far side of the mountain just went up. A silent fireball in the twilight that bloomed with a sudden whoosh instead of a boom. The comms tower was next, filled the air with a screeching static that felt like it was drilling into your skull. One by one, they cut our supply lines, disabled our vehicles, and blinded our sensors. It was more like an infestation than a battle. This was nothing like the official reports, which described a brutal, overwhelming assault and scorched earth tactics. They only hit us at our weakest spots, Storr continued, his voice almost a whisper. They were ghosts in the dust. We'd send out patrols, and they'd find footprints that just stopped on solid rock. Then the patrol would disappear. Our calls were met with nothing but silence. We found them later, their gear dismantled, power packs gone, weapons fused into junk with some kind of chemical. The crews were just tied up, unharmed, staring into space. He looked right at Neri, his eyes burning with a 20-year-old memory. It was dirty, dishonorable. They refused to face us head-on, blade to blade. They bled us dry piece by piece. They stripped away everything that made us an army until we were just a bunch of cold, thirsty soldiers, trapped in a rock fortress, waiting for an enemy who wouldn't even grant us the dignity of a real fight. By the time they finally hit the main gate, our will to fight had turned to dust. They'd already won before they fired a single angry shot. He tapped a scarred finger against his temple. They fought the war in here, in your head. They cut you off, made you feel helpless. They turned our greatest strength, our fortress, into our tomb. That's why the law exists. Their way of fighting is different. Their goal is simple: to end the war. They don't care about glory or honor or territory, and to reach that one terrifying goal, they will do anything, no matter how ugly. The Assembly would rather have endless wars enriching the galaxy than a decisive victory. It's bad for their bottom line. He picked up the grinder again, signaling the conversation was over. Neri backed out of the workshop, his words ringing in her head. Her image of the Firebreak Company as a mindless horde of killers was shattering, replaced by something far more chilling. A surgeon's scalpel, wielded with terrifying and maybe even unwilling precision. That night, sleep only brought the fire. In her dream, She was a child again. Her wings were spread wide, catching the warm updrafts from the geothermal vents all over Aisha's capital city. The sky was a perfect, flawless sapphire. Down below, laughter echoed in the plaza as she soared with the other younglings. Her father's voice was a warm breeze, calling her name. And then the sky began to bleed. It began at the very edge of the atmosphere, a faint crimson stain that spread like ink dropped in water. The atmospheric weapon was a chemical agent designed to set the upper sky on fire, turning the whole thing into a giant lens that would focus the sun's heat onto the planet's surface. A planetary kill switch. The air grew heavy, hot, and shimmered with a light that went from life-giving to scorching. Panic erupted in the plaza below. Laughter turned into screams. The beautiful blue sky of her memory became a permanent, hellish red. A calm, steady voice suddenly broadcast over every channel, cutting through every other sound. A human voice. Coulson Park's voice, though she didn't know his name back then. "To the Governing Council and the people of Asha," the voice said, "by order of the Galactic Assembly Joint Command, your world is now a primary military target. Your leaders were offered the chance for unconditional surrender. They refused. Our mission is to ensure the safety of all non-combatants. A list of coordinates for safe civilian evacuation corridors is now broadcasting on a continuous loop. You have 3 standard hours to get to these corridors. We strongly advise you to comply. This will be our only transmission." The response from the Ishan leaders was a broadcast filled with defiance. They called the humans cowards for hiding in orbit. They called the offer a trap. They told their people to fight, to die for their world's honor. And with those words, they sealed the fate of millions. Her father had tried to carry her to an evacuation point. He wrapped her in his own wings, trying to shield her from the searing heat that was now raining down from the blood-red sky. She remembered the crush of the crowd, the smell of burning flesh, the concussive blasts of the first orbital strikes hitting military targets on the city's edge. She woke up with a gasp, tangled in the simple blanket on her cot. Her own wings ached with a phantom fire. The room was dark and silent, but in her mind the sky was still on fire. The voice of the man who offered a chance at life before unleashing death echoed in the haunted corners of her memory. It was a chilling contrast to the proud voices of her own leaders, who had chosen death for them all. A jagged piece of scrap metal, half buried in the dust near the commune's fence, drew blood. Neri had been walking, trying to clear her head after the nightmare, when she stumbled. She threw out a hand to catch herself, and a sharp edge sliced right through her palm. The pain was real, a welcome anchor that pulled her out of her thoughts. Dark, purplish-red blood welled up from the gash. She stared at it, strangely detached. "Here, let me see that." Neri jumped, spinning around. It was Sona, holding a small first aid kit. She must have been watching from the infirmary window. "It's nothing." Neri tried to hide her hand behind her back. Sona's smile was gentle. "Everything's something. Come on." She didn't wait for an argument, just gently led Neri inside. The clean scent of antiseptic and dried herbs filled the small room that served as the commune's clinic. Sona had her sit on an examination stool and took her hand, her touch surprisingly firm and confident. "Hold still," she murmured, her voice a soothing hum. She cleaned the wound, every motion precise and efficient. As she applied a disinfectant that stung with a clean, sharp bite, Neri found herself studying the woman's hands. They were strong, steady hands, a healer's hands. After cleaning the cut, Sona placed a thin, clear patch over it. "It's a bioconductive seal," she explained, her eyes not quite meeting Neri's. "Standard firebreak issue. It'll merge with your cells so you won't have a scar. It's also coated with a low-level medical access key. Don't worry, it'll dissolve in a few hours." "You're very skilled," Neri said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Sona looked up from her work, and for a second her eyes seemed clouded with old memories. She wrapped a clean white bandage around Neri's hand. "You learn to be steady when the floor is shaking, the lights are flickering, and the person on your table has about 3 minutes left to live." Sona tied off the bandage with a quick, certain knot. Her fingers, still bare, lightly grazed the new bandage on her hand. I was the chief medical officer for his company, you know. Neri's breath hitched. She had suspected it, but hearing it out loud was different. You were with him? On my world? I was with him everywhere, Sona said, her voice quiet but firm as she cleaned her tools, her back turned. I saw Coulson Park at his absolute best, and I saw him at his worst. I watched him give an order that saved 1,000 of our people, and I watched him give the order that destroyed your home. This was her moment, the chance to scream, to blame, to demand why. But Neri's anger had burned out, replaced by a deep, painful need to understand. You fought differently, she said, her voice raspy. Sona stopped what she was doing. She turned, leaning against the counter. We had to. We were always the underdogs, always outgunned. Our company was like a surgeon's scalpel, sent in to do the messy jobs nobody else wanted. Coulson's gift and his curse was that he saw war not as a battle, but as a system that could be broken. He didn't aim for soldiers, he aimed for supply lines and morale. He believed that if you broke an army's spirit, you wouldn't have to kill its people. Neri remembered the stories of what happened, the brutal efficiency of it all. And the civilians? She asked, her voice just a whisper. Were we just a morale problem to him? Sona came over and sat on the stool right next to her, so close their knees were almost touching. Do you want the real truth? Neri could only nod. Then we need to talk about Velis Garrison. It was a communications hub on a planet called Terrace, Sona began, her eyes distant, replaying a memory only she could see. It was critical for the Crayon forces in that sector. Taking it down was our #1 priority. High Command gave Coulson a direct order, neutralize that tower, no matter the cost. A simple orbital strike would have vaporized it in seconds, clean, fast, easy. She took a shaky breath, but our deep-range scans saw something that High Command either missed or decided to ignore. We found hundreds of life signs huddled in the lower levels of the tower. They weren't soldiers. They were Crayon families, maintenance workers and their kids, using the tower's military-grade shielding as a makeshift bomb shelter. Neri felt a chill run down her spine, seeing a twisted reflection of her own story. Coulson had his orders, Sona said, her voice tight with emotion. A direct command, neutralize the tower. Every single minute we waited, the enemy was coordinating their fleets, killing more of our people on other worlds. Calling in that orbital strike was the smart move, strategically. It would have been written off as collateral damage. They would have issued a formal apology and the war would have moved on. Sona stared down at her own hands, but he refused. He broke protocol. He opened a direct channel to the enemy commander and told him about the coming strike and that civilians were inside. He offered them a 1-hour ceasefire to get their people out. The Crayon commander didn't believe him. He called him a coward, a liar, and screamed curses over the comms. So Coulson made a choice. He disobeyed a direct order from the top. He canceled the orbital strike and ordered a ground assault. He told his soldiers, "We're taking that tower, but you do not fire on the lower levels." He turned a 2-hour remote mission into a 3-day, bloody, close-quarters nightmare. For the next 72 hours, the cost of that decision came back to my medical bay in pieces. He completely changed our attack plan just to create a safe path for those non-combatants to escape out the back while we attacked the front. He sacrificed his own soldiers to save the families of the very men trying to kill him. We lost 19 Marines taking that tower, 19 soldiers who would be alive today if he had just followed orders. She finally looked at Neri, tears shining in her eyes but refusing to fall. That's the man you came here to kill, a man who is haunted by the ghosts of the soldiers he let die just to save his enemy's children. Sona then stood and went to a small, locked cabinet. After the war, our company was disgraced and broken up. As medical officer, it was my job to keep the records of our fallen, their last messages, their personal effects. The assembly wanted nothing to do with them. They sealed the records, locking them out of the main systems. But Coulson had them sealed with military-grade biometric locks, keyed only to our company personnel. He said their stories belonged to them, not to the politicians, so I gave them all to him. The weight of her words landed on Neri, crushing her. The simple, clean lines of her world, victim and monster, good and evil, were blurring into a messy, confusing gray. The monster she hunted had sacrificed his own men to save his enemies. What did that make the people he had let die? What did that make her? The two moons of Karun cast long, skeletal shadows over the courtyard. The air was cold and silent. Coulson was sitting on a low stone wall at the edge of the camp, just staring out into the dark, windswept plains. He didn't turn as she walked up behind him, her footsteps silent in the thick dust. She stopped just a few feet away. The handle of her blade felt cold and foreign in her hand. All the righteous fire she'd carried for years had burned out, leaving nothing but the cold ash of confusion. "On my world, we wear pins of volcanic glass to mourn our dead," he said, his voice so quiet the wind almost stole it. "One for each member of the family we lose. You wore 6. He said it like a simple fact he had known all along. He turned his head just slightly, his face outlined by the pale moonlight. "I remember the sky that day," he said, his voice raw with old pain, the color of it. "I see it every time I close my eyes. I hear the broadcasts, all of them." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn brass key. He held it out to her, his hand perfectly steady. "Sona told me she spoke with you. But you deserve to see the unvarnished truth for yourself, all of it." He gently pressed the key into her palm. The metal was warm from his touch. "It's for the footlocker in my room, by the bed. It's all in there. You deserve the context. Whatever you choose to do after you have it, I'll understand." With that, he turned back to face the plains, leaving her standing alone in the moonlight, with the key that could change everything. Coulson's room was as simple as a monk's cell, containing only a cot, a small table, and a single chair. Against one wall sat a standard-issue military footlocker, its dark gray metal covered in scars and dents from a long, hard life. Her hand trembled as she put the key in the lock. It turned with a heavy, final-sounding click. She lifted the lid. Inside, there were no trophies, no souvenirs of conquest. There were only military mem tags, dozens and dozens of them, packed in tight, each etched with a name and a serial number. Each one of these little metal plates represented a life, a full service record, a collection of digitized personal belongings, a ghost in a box. This was the secret archive of the Firebreak Company. This footlocker was their tomb, a memorial kept only by Coulson and Sona. She had come here looking for the story of one evil man, and instead, she had found a library of 100 tragedies. She picked one up. The name etched into it read, Corporal R.M. Becky. It felt impossibly heavy. She took the mem tag back to her own room. The entire camp was asleep. The only sound was the wind. She sat on her cot and tried to access the tag with her personal scanner. Access denied. She tried again, running a decryption program. Encryption exceeds parameters. Biometric lock engaged. Frustrated, she looked closer at the tag, her fingers tracing its cold surface. She noticed a small flush plate of glass right next to the data port, a biometric scanner. Sona's words echoed in her head, keyed only to Firebreak personnel. It was a wall she couldn't climb. Just as she was about to give up, her eyes landed on the clean white dressing on her hand. She remembered Sona's gentle fingers adjusting the bandage. A healer's touch. It was a crazy long shot. A trace of DNA on a bandage to act as a key? But Sona was Firebreak personnel. And the way she'd done it, it had felt deliberate, like a secret message disguised as an act of kindness. Her heart pounded in her chest. She carefully peeled back the edge of the bioconductive seal Sona had placed on her palm. Holding her breath, she pressed her hand flat against the scanner on the mem tag. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a tiny green light on the tag flickered once, twice, then stayed on. A soft chime echoed in the quiet room. Unlocked. The medical access key Sona had secretly encoded into the bandage, a ghost of a healer's kindness, had been enough. It felt like a betrayal, using someone's compassion to break into their secrets, but she had to know. She connected her scanner again. This time, the files opened. The first thing she saw wasn't personal letters or photos, but cold, hard data. Holographic maps of her home system lit up the air above her scanner. Troop movements, supply lines, fleet deployments, all laid out in stark blue and red. Her entire world, Isha, was reduced to a strategic point on a map, all the life and love and home stripped away. A pulsating red circle appeared on the screen, with dozens of lines branching out from it like a spider web. She pulled up the mission analysis. The target was identified as Isha Prime. Its status, the main command and control center for the whole region. The file expanded, explaining that this single hub coordinated every fleet movement, all logistical support and strategic deployments for the Crayon Imperium's forces. It was home to their primary strategic AI and the central communications array for the entire sector. The analysis was chillingly clear. Destroying Isha Prime would be like cutting the head off a snake. It would blind, deafen, and starve all enemy forces in the region, cutting them off from resupply. The projected result? A complete collapse of their command network, forcing an end to all fighting across the region within 72 standard hours. And then she saw the final projection, estimated lives saved on both allied and enemy worlds, 40 to 50 million. A cold dread washed over Nair as she stared at the number. 50 million. They had sacrificed her home, her people, to save 50 million strangers. It was nothing more than a cold calculation, a brutal math problem solved a galaxy away. They put her entire world on one side of a scale and dozens of other worlds on the other and simply made a choice. All her rage, her grief, the singular focus that had driven her entire life. It was all just a variable in a strategic equation. The sterile, clean logic of it felt more disgusting than any simple act of violence. She dug deeper and found it, the operational briefing for the assault on Isha Prime. It was a recording of Coulson Park, 10 years younger, his face harder and leaner, but with the same haunted look already in his eyes. He stood before a holographic assembly of Marines from Firebreak Company. "Listen up," he said, his voice flat, completely empty of any heroic fanfare. "High Command has given us our last mission. The target is Isha Prime. The weapon is an atmospheric ordnance, a chemical agent that will turn the very sky into a weapon." He paused. However, Isha's shield grid has atmospheric purifiers built to neutralize this exact kind of attack. The fleet can't release the ordnance until those purifiers are taken offline. A low murmur rippled through the soldiers. "That's where we come in," Coulson continued, his eyes sweeping across his company. "The purifiers are powered by 4 main shield generators on the planet's surface. We're going to perform a high-altitude, low-opening drop, punch right through their perimeter defenses, and disable those generators by hand. Once the generators are down, the purifiers fail, and the fleet drops the ordnance. Our job is to open the sky." He stopped, and a heavy silence filled the virtual room. "This is a one-way ticket, people. The enemy knows we're coming. They're going to throw their entire planetary defense grid at us. We will be outnumbered, we will be outgunned, and extraction is not part of the plan. Mission success is the only thing that matters. Our success will be measured by one thing and one thing only, getting those shields down. The lives we save tomorrow will be bought with our lives today." The faces of the soldiers showed nothing but a quiet, grim acceptance. They were ready to see the impossible task through. Nair opened the helmet cam footage next. The memory tag contained the last hours of a Corporal Mbeki. Her view was suddenly a dizzying fall through a blood-red sky, filled with the shriek of the wind and the deep thud of anti-aircraft fire exploding around her. The landing was a brutal crash into a field of shattered glassy plants. Then, the world became a frantic blur. The defenders of Isha were a militia, their faces twisted with fear behind their combat masks, a world away from the noble warriors she remembered from her childhood. The soldiers of Firebreak Company moved with a grim, calculated purpose. Every step was measured, every shot aimed. They spoke in clipped bursts of jargon, not war cries. "Suppressing fire on Zone 3. Sona casualty at Grid 49er. Rebecca's down. Generator 1 is hot. Plant the charge. Corporal Mbeki, the man whose eyes she was now seeing through, sprinted through a storm of plasma fire, clutching a demolition charge. He finally reached the base of a massive generator, his breathing a harsh, ragged gasp in the audio feed. He set the charge, his hands moving with practiced speed. Just as he turned to run, a plasma bolt slammed into his chest. The world tilted sideways. He was on the ground, looking up at the crimson sky he had just helped to create. A fellow Marine, Sona, knelt over him, her own helmet retracted. Mbeki's own pain-racked face was faintly reflected in Sona's visor as she frantically tried to seal the wound. It's no good, Doc," Mbeki gasped, his voice wet with blood. "It's no good." "Don't you talk like that, Corporal." Sona's voice was strained, but she forced it to be steady. "You're going home." A faint, bloody smile touched Mbeki's lips. "We all are." The charge detonated. The generator exploded in a blinding flash of white light, and the feed went dead. Nair yanked her hand away from the scanner, gasping for air. A man had just died right in front of her. A man who died to destroy her world in order to save others. He was just a soldier, a young man following orders to his bitter, lonely end. She looked at the dozens of other memory tags in the footlocker. Every single one held a similar story. Every single one was a price that was paid, a soul lost in the terrible arithmetic of war. The very last file was an official recording, logged by a Galactic Assembly Field representative. The timestamp was 2 days after the main assault, and the location was the smoldering ruins of the Isha Command Center. A woman in a crisp, clean assembly uniform was screaming at Coulson Park. He just stood there, his armor scorched and pitted, his face smeared with soot and blood. The bodies of his own soldiers lay on the ground around him, next to the bodies of Isha's defenders. "This is a massacre, a butchery!" the representative shrieked, her voice thin and high. "You have violated every rule of engagement. You've committed a war crime on a massive scale. The Assembly will have your head for this." Coulson just looked at her, his voice perfectly even, letting her accusations hang in the air. He looked empty. The brilliant strategist was gone, leaving only a hollowed-out man. "We did what you couldn't," he said, his voice a dead, toneless rasp. "We ended it. Here. We stopped the signal. The Krayan fleets in this region are flying blind. The war is over. Millions of people on a dozen worlds are going to wake up tomorrow because of what my Marines did here today." He took a small step toward her, and the representative flinched, as if she was finally seeing the true cost of her orders standing right in front of her. Coulson glanced over the bodies of his fallen soldiers. "You sent us. You gave us the objective. You told us to win. So, we won, the only way we knew how." He looked back at the terrified politician, a cold, banked fire deep in his eyes. "But if you ever ask us to do this again, if you let humanity keep fighting your wars for you, you will govern a graveyard, and you'll find only silence where there was once hate." The representative was silent, the fury draining from her face, replaced by a slow, dawning horror. The law was there to protect the galaxy from human thoroughness, not human cruelty. It was a law born from fear, a shield built from terror, not condemnation. The first light of dawn was painting the sky in shades of rose and gold when Nair finally left Coulson's quarters. The footlocker was closed. The memory tags returned to their silent watch. She crossed the courtyard, her feet making no sound in the dust. He was in the exact same spot, sitting on the low stone wall, meditating in the pre-dawn light. He hadn't moved all night. She walked up silently behind him. She reached for the hilt of her blade. The cold metal felt alien in her hand now, like a relic from a different life, from a different person. The sounds of the waking community began to filter into the quiet morning. A door sliding open, the low grumble of a drudge, the distant laughter of a child. The only sounds between her and Coulson were the rush of the wind and the ragged sound of her own breathing. This was it. This was the moment she had spent a decade hating and planning for, the final act of her vengeance. Coulson opened his eyes. He didn't turn around, just sat there with his back to her and waited for the blow to fall. He had given her the truth, and now he would give her his life. Nair raised the blade. Its edge, forged from the wreckage of her own home, caught the first light of the rising sun. His reflection shimmered on the polished steel, a tired old man just waiting to die. Her own reflection stared back at her, a woman holding a weapon, her face a mask of grief. The memories of the last 12 hours flooded her mind. The soldier dying for a cause he believed in, the medic trying to save an enemy, the commander hollowed out by the monstrous math of his own victory. And this community, this fragile sanctuary built from the ashes of their shared, terrible past. She could kill him. It would be so easy. One clean stroke, but it would be an empty act. Her family would still be dead. Her world would still be ash. All it would do is kill the one man who mourned it with her. It would only destroy the one place in the galaxy that had been built on the foundation of his atonement. The blade felt heavy in her hand. She trembled with the weight of it, the weight of her choice. Instead of striking, a single broken question escaped her lips, a whisper swallowed by the wind. "Why?" she choked out. "Why did you save their records?" He finally turned, his body moving with the slow creak of age and sorrow. He looked up at her, at the blade she held, and his eyes filled with a sadness she could finally understand. "Someone had to," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Someone had to remember they were more than weapons, that they were boys who wrote letters home, that they were fathers and daughters and sons, that they had names." He looked past her, toward the waking community. Someone had to remember, so that we could build something better than a memorial. Nair's gaze slowly moved from his face down to the blade in her hand. That blade was a promise of vengeance, born from ashes and sharpened by grief. It was her entire past, distilled into cold, hard steel. But then she looked up and saw Tiller's Fold. She saw kids laughing as they chased a ball across the courtyard. She saw Stowe gruffly showing a young apprentice how to hold a tool, and Sona humming as she carried a basket of fresh herbs from the garden. This was a future she could have. With a ragged breath that felt like it was tearing her apart, she flipped her grip on the dagger. She plunged it, point first, deep into the sun-baked ground at her feet. The hilt shuddered for a second, then went still, a lonely metal gravestone for a past she was choosing to bury. She left it there and walked away, her hands feeling strangely light and empty for the first time in 10 years. The winds of Karun still howled from time to time, but the deep chill in Neri's wings had started to fade. She found a quiet purpose tending to the new life in the gardens, and the commune silence, once unsettling, now felt like a warm blanket. One afternoon, a rickety dust skimmer sputtered to a stop at the entrance. A new family of refugees climbed out, a mother and her 2 little ones. They were bone-thin, with huge, haunted eyes. They were Isha. Their wings were shredded and gray with dust. The whole community started to move, ready to welcome them. But it was Neri who took the first step. She walked toward the broken family, her own scarred wings telling a story they would understand without a single word. She knelt in the dirt, making herself small and unthreatening, just as Coulson had for her on her first day. "Welcome," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You're safe now." She gently took the smallest child's hand, guiding them toward the warmth and the unspoken promise of peace inside. As she helped the newcomers get settled, handing them blankets and a steaming bowl of stew, she glanced across the courtyard and saw Coulson standing by the workshop, watching her. Their eyes met. For the first time since she was a little girl, soaring through a perfect blue ski, a real smile touched Neri's lips, a quiet, weightless expression. In response, Coulson gave her a slow, respectful nod. Neri turned back to the family, and a profound sense of peace washed over her. The weight of her past was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer a crushing burden, but an anchor holding her steady. The sky above Tiller's Fold was wide, clear, and endless blue.